It may sound crazy to say it, but attraction has never followed the rules people repeat in order to feel morally correct. From the beginning, Machiavelli understood something uncomfortable. Human beings do not react to good intentions. They react to the strength they perceive behind them. In the emotional world, exactly the same thing happens. It does not matter how much good you think you are doing if your behavior shows weakness, neediness, or fear of losing. Attraction is not activated by compassion or by constant sacrifice, but by the feeling of structure, direction, and self-control. Here we find the first big clash with the popular narrative. People are taught that treating someone well means giving in, explaining, justifying, adapting, and always placing yourself one step behind so as not to bother anyone. But that is not dignified behavior. It is the abandonment of personal authority. Machiavelli warned that whoever gives up control over himself ends up being ruled by others. In the dynamic between men and women, this principle appears very clearly. When your world revolves around pleasing others, you lose your center. When you lose your center, you lose respect. And when there is no respect, desire dissolves. Treating someone as you truly should does not mean being harsh for no reason or pretending to be cold. It means inner coherence. It means your decisions do not change based on someone else's mood. It means your values are not negotiated in exchange for attention. It means you do not react impulsively just to calm the anxiety of wanting to be accepted. Self-control is the foundation of all authority, and authority, even if it sounds uncomfortable to say, is deeply attractive. Not because it oppresses, but because it gives security. What is unstable creates anxiety. What is firm creates confidence. Machiavelli never spoke about being loved at any cost. On the contrary, he made it clear that love without respect is fragile, volatile, and dangerous. The same happens with attraction. When you give yourself without limits, when you explain too much, when you constantly seek approval, you silently communicate one truth: that you need more than you choose. And neediness has never been attractive. Choice is attractive. Choosing to stay, but also being able to leave. Choosing to care, but not to submit. Choosing to share, but not to dissolve yourself. There is a fundamental difference between treating someone well and treating from weakness. Treating well means offering presence without losing identity. It means listening without giving up your own judgment. It means showing interest without begging for reciprocity. Machiavelli understood that the effective prince was not the one who tried to please everyone, but the one who maintained a clear line even when it created discomfort. In attraction, that slight discomfort, that feeling of not having total control over the other person, is exactly what keeps interest alive. What looks like madness is actually an honest reading of human nature. People are not attracted to those who empty themselves to fill others, but to those who are already complete and share from abundance. Too much early giving does not communicate love. It communicates urgency, and urgency destroys desire. Calmness, on the other hand, strengthens it. The one who does not run, who does not chase, who does not fall apart emotionally, projects a silent strength that does not need to prove itself. This first principle is clear. The way you treat others determines how they see you, but that way of treating is born from how you govern yourself. If there is no inner control, there is no magnetism. If there are no boundaries, there is no respect. If there is no respect, everything else is an illusion. Machiavelli knew this. Before ruling any relationship, you must rule yourself. Only from there does treatment become, ironically, what many call madness, but deep down is pure truth. The second principle is uncomfortable because it attacks the ego directly. Desire does not respond to the logic of emotional fairness, but to the logic of perceived power. Machiavelli made this clear when speaking about the favor of the people. It is not maintained through constant concessions, but through a firm image that does not bend to every demand. In attraction, the same thing happens. When you constantly try to prove that you are better, more attentive, or more understanding, you do not increase your value, you erode it. Excess effort communicates lack, and lack weakens any position. Here appears a truth many prefer to ignore. Attraction requires friction, not destructive conflict, but tension, difference, resistance. When everything is easy, immediate, and guaranteed, the mind stops investing. Machiavelli understood that what is obtained without cost is not protected. In relationships, when your time, attention, and energy are always available, they lose symbolic weight, not because they are worthless, but because they require no choice. The most common mistake is confusing interest with pursuit. Showing interest means being present, clear, and consistent. Pursuing means insisting when there is no reciprocity, explaining when nobody asked, justifying yourself when nobody accused you. Every time you do that, You give up psychological ground, not because the other person is evil, but because the human brain interprets insistence as a sign of imbalance. Machiavelli would say it bluntly: whoever exposes himself too much becomes vulnerable to contempt, even if that contempt is never spoken out loud. There is a silent dynamic that rules desire. The one who needs less controls the rhythm. This is not manipulation, it is structure. The one who can walk away without collapsing emotionally has the advantage. That is why conscious detachment is not coldness, it is inner power. It is not about pretending disinterest, but about not depending on the outcome. When your identity is not tied to the other person's reaction, your presence becomes heavier, more solid, harder to ignore. Machiavelli taught that the prince must avoid being despised, not hated, despised. In attraction, despising appears when they realize you would do anything just to stay, when there are no limits, no consequences, when everything is forgiven and everything is tolerated. Value drops not because there is no kindness, but because there is no backbone. Respect is not requested, it is imposed through behavior. This chapter revolves around one central idea. Desire is not negotiated through sacrifice, it is awakened through position. Having position means knowing when to move forward and when to stop. It means not over-explaining your emotions, not dramatizing someone else's silence, not turning every interaction into a test of your personal worth. Machiavelli knew that too much transparency weakens authority in the emotional field. Showing all your insecurities without restraint does not create intimacy, it creates burden. There is a paradox few people accept. Leaving at the right time can increase interest more than insisting, not as a calculated strategy, but as a natural result of having a life that does not revolve around one single person. When your world is wide, your decisions carry more weight. When your whole world shrinks down to one source of validation, you become predictable. And what is predictable eventually stops being desirable. This second movement demands inner discipline. It requires tolerating uncertainty without reacting, enduring silence without trying to fill it, staying on your path even when doubt appears. Machiavelli understood that true control does not lie in dominating the other, but in not being dominated by the fear of losing them. That is where real attraction is born, not in begging, but in the calm firmness of someone who knows he can stay, but also knows he can leave. The third principle is the most misunderstood of all, because it touches a sensitive nerve. A boundary is not rejection, it is structure. Machiavelli understood that power without clear limits rots from the inside. In attraction, the same thing happens. When there is no boundary, when everything is allowed, when nothing has consequences, the bond loses its shape. And what has no shape does not create desire, only habit. There is a naive belief that setting boundaries breaks the connection. In reality, it defines it. A boundary is not punishment or manipulation. It is a silent declaration of value. It says, this is who I am, this is what I accept, this is what I don't. When that clarity is missing, the other person does not feel secure, they feel lost. And the human mind needs structure in order to orient itself emotionally. Machiavelli knew that a prince should be predictable in his laws, even if not always in his actions. That structural predictability created stability. In emotional dynamics, the same thing happens. It is not about being erratic, it is about being firm. If today you tolerate something that tomorrow bothers you, if today you stay silent about what you will later criticize, if today you give in out of fear and tomorrow complain out of frustration, you project weakness, not flexibility. A clear boundary prevents silent resentment, which is the most common poison in any relationship. Setting boundaries means accepting an uncomfortable truth. Not everyone will stay, and that's okay. The fear of losing is what pushes many people to betray themselves. Machiavelli warned that ruling from fear of others' reactions leads to collapse. In attraction, when you act only to preserve the bond, you begin to deform yourself. You say yes when you want to say no. You stay when you should leave. You stay silent when you should mark your emotional territory. A real boundary is not announced with long speeches. It is communicated through action, through stepping away when something crosses your line, through silence when there is no respect, through coherence between what you tolerate and what you claim. It is not a threat, it is a natural consequence, and consequences, not words, shape the other person's perception. Here another paradox appears. Boundaries create more security than total permissiveness. Even if at the beginning they create resistance, in the long term, they create respect. Machiavelli understood that mercy without order leads to contempt. In relationships, tolerance without criteria leads to the same result. Not because the other person is bad, but because human beings always test how far they can go. If they find no edge, they lose reference. Setting a boundary is also a form of self-respect, and self-respect is visible even when it is not named. It can be felt in your tone, in your rhythm, in the way you respond. When you don't need to explain why something isn't right for you, when you don't justify every emotional decision, when you don't negotiate your dignity for attention, you project a calm firmness that is deeply attractive. Not because it dominates, but because it creates order. Machiavelli never confused love with weakness. He knew that even affection needs a frame. Without a frame, it dissolves. Without a frame, it becomes chaotic. In attraction, a boundary works like that invisible frame that sustains desire over time. It does not suffocate, it contains. It does not make things cold, it stabilizes. It does not push away, it filters. This third chapter leaves a clear lesson. Whoever does not know how to set boundaries ends up being defined by the boundaries of others. And in that position, there is no attraction, only constant adaptation. Emotional power is not born from imposing, but from not allowing yourself to be erased. Machiavelli understood this harshly. Respect does not come from pleasing, but from the silent firmness of someone who knows exactly where he stands and does not move from there out of fear. The fourth principle moves into an even more uncomfortable area. Silence and controlled absence communicate more than any emotional explanation. Machiavelli understood that power is not exercised by reacting to everything, but by choosing when to respond and when not to. In attraction, the most common mistake is believing that everything must be clarified, talked through, and resolved immediately. That urgency does not come from care. It comes from anxiety, and anxiety always weakens your position. Silence is not punishment nor a cheap psychological game. It is space, it is pause, it is mastery over impulse. When you respond immediately to every emotional stimulus, you give away control of the rhythm. You become reactive. Machiavelli warned that whoever acts under the pressure of others stops governing. In a relationship, when you feel you must constantly explain, calm, or justify yourself so as not to lose, you are already losing. There is a deep difference between presence and total availability. Presence is a conscious choice. Constant availability is dissolution. When you are always there, always responding, always emotionally accessible without any filter, your presence stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like a guarantee. And what is guaranteed loses tension. Without tension, desire becomes flat. Silence, when used well, does not create emotional distance. It creates gravity. It forces the other person to face their own perception. Machiavelli knew that many times people fear more what they do not fully understand than what is completely exposed. In attraction, something similar happens. Not showing every thought, not verbalizing every emotion, not reacting to every doubt, maintains a depth that too many words destroy. Most people confuse silence with coldness because they cannot tolerate uncertainty. But uncertainty is an essential part of interest. When everything is said, when everything is explained, when everything is emotionally resolved, the mind stops investing energy. Not because there is no affection, but because there is no stimulus. Silence does not eliminate the bond, it eliminates overload. Stepping back at the right time is also a form of communication, not as a threat, but as coherence. If something bothers you and you choose to take distance without drama or reproach, you are drawing an invisible but powerful line. You do not chase, you do not complain, you do not punish, you simply move. Machiavelli understood that strategic withdrawal often has more impact than direct confrontation. Here, a truth appears that few people accept. Over-explaining is often a confession of insecurity. When you constantly justify yourself, you communicate that you need to be understood in order to feel valid. Inner power, on the other hand, does not need immediate approval. It remains firm even in temporary misunderstanding. Silence shows that you can tolerate not being validated instantly, and that tolerance is a silent form of authority. Control of rhythm is key. Not accelerating intimacy, not forcing emotional clarity too soon, not filling empty spaces with nervous words. Machiavelli knew that rushing processes weaken structures. In attraction, what ripens too fast also rots fast. Pause allows interest to grow by choice, not by pressure. This principle is not for those who need constant security. It is for those who understand that desire needs space to breathe. Silence is not absence of interest. It is presence without anxiety. Withdrawal is not rejection, it is self-regulation. Whoever masters the impulse to explain, to react, to chase, projects a calm that cannot be learned from romantic manuals. Here, the central idea becomes solid. Not everything is won by being closer. Sometimes what sustains interest is knowing when not to be there. Machiavelli knew this. The most effective power is not the one constantly displayed, but the one that is felt even when it is off stage. The fifth principle closes the circle. Consistency is worth more than intensity. Machiavelli understood that power is not sustained by grand gestures, but by a line of behavior that does not break under pressure. In attraction, the same thing happens. Emotional peaks may impress at the beginning, but only consistency creates trust and lasting desire. Intensity without stability is exhausting. Stability without neediness is seductive. Many people believe that to keep interest alive, you must constantly surprise, give more, feel more, prove more. That mistake comes from confusing emotion with connection. Emotion is volatile. Connection is built. When today you are close and tomorrow you are distant because of insecurity, when today you promise and tomorrow you doubt, when today you seem strong and tomorrow you apologize for existing, the message is not depth, it is instability. And instability erodes attraction, even when wrapped in passion. Consistency does not mean rigidity, it means predictability in values and behavior. It means your way of treating others does not depend on fear of losing or desire to hold on. Machiavelli knew that the prince had to be recognizable in the way he acted. Only then did his authority become believable. In relationships, when your reactions are clear and proportional, the other person knows what to expect. That clarity creates calm, and calm is fertile ground for desire. Here comes an uncomfortable truth. Promising less and delivering more is worth far more than declaring emotions you cannot sustain. Too many words create expectations. Consistency fulfills them. When you say little but act in alignment, your presence gains weight. When you say a lot but fluctuate, your words lose value. Machiavelli warned against the ruler who spoke more than he acted. In attraction, that mistake is very costly. Being consistent also means not negotiating your standards based on the other person's reaction. If today you accept what bothered you yesterday just to maintain closeness, you fracture your own structure. And when you break your structure, the other person stops trusting you, even if they cannot explain why. Respect is built when they see you do not betray yourself just to please others. That loyalty to yourself is silent, but noticeable. Constant calm is more powerful than occasional enthusiasm. Not because it is boring, but because it is safe. Machiavelli understood that order is more feared and respected than charismatic chaos. In the emotional world, the person who does not overflow, does not dramatize, and does not change direction with every stimulus becomes a reference point, and reference points attract. This principle requires maturity. It requires letting go of the need to impress. It requires maintaining the same behavior when there is interest and when there is doubt. It requires not using intensity as a bargaining chip. When your way of being does not depend on immediate results, you project a quiet strength that does not need validation. Attraction is not maintained with promises. It is sustained through reliable presence, decisions that do not contradict themselves, boundaries that do not move, and silences that do not hide fear. Machiavelli understood this with brutal clarity. True power is not the power that dazzles for one day. It is the power that remains the next day without needing to be explained. This conclusion is simple and demanding at the same time. Be consistent. Not perfect, not excessive. Consistent. Whoever achieves that does not need to convince, chase, or prove anything. Their very way of being already communicates everything, and that coherence, even if few people know how to name it, is one of the most attractive forces that exist. The sixth principle goes beyond attraction and enters a decisive territory. Choosing without being attached to the result. Machiavelli understood that the most dangerous ruler was not the most aggressive, but the one who could make decisions without becoming a prisoner of his emotions. In relationships, the same thing happens. The moment your well-being depends on someone else's reaction, gesture, or validation, you have surrendered control. And without inner control, everything else becomes fragile. Choosing without attachment does not mean indifference. It means freedom. It means you get involved because you want to, not because you need to. It means you stay because you choose to, not because you are afraid to lose. That difference, even if never spoken aloud, is felt with brutal clarity. Neediness is heavy. Choice is liberating. Machiavelli knew that the person who acts from need is easy to manipulate. In attraction, the one who needs ends up adapting, justifying, and slowly betraying themselves. Here appears the breaking point many people avoid: the real ability to leave. Not as a threat, not as a game, not as a tactic to provoke a reaction, but as a genuine possibility. When you truly know you can walk away without breaking inside, your presence changes. You no longer try to hold on. You no longer negotiate your dignity. You no longer chase signals. You are there, but you are not attached. And that conscious detachment is one of the purest forms of personal power. Machiavelli understood that a prince had to be willing to lose support if that preserved his authority. Emotionally, being willing to leave a connection that throws you off balance is an act of self-respect. Not because the other person is wrong, but because not every bond deserves continuity. Selection is also a form of care. Care for yourself. This principle demands uncomfortable honesty. Accept that not every interest has to become a bond, and not every bond must be sustained at any cost. When you stay where you are minimized, when you insist where there is no clear reciprocity, when you adapt in places where you lose your center, the inner message is devastating, that you are worth less than the attention you receive. And that inner narrative filters into every gesture, every word, every silence. To choose always means to give something up. You must give up the fantasy of controlling everything. Give up the idea that with enough effort, everything can be saved. Machiavelli did not believe in idealized endings. He believed in sustainable positions. In attraction, a sustainable position is the one where you can look at the other person without anxiety, without fear, without needing to convince them, where your calm does not depend on the result. When you choose from inner abundance, your reactions change. You don't rush. You don't pressure. You don't dramatize. You don't chase immediate clarity. You let time and behavior speak. And if the response does not meet your standards, you leave quietly, not as punishment, but as a natural consequence. That clean withdrawal, without resentment or endless explanation, is one of the clearest signs of emotional power. This chapter also reveals a harsh truth. Many people confuse intensity with connection because they don't know how to be alone without feeling empty. Conscious detachment requires building a life that does not depend on a single source of validation: work, purpose, discipline, direction. When your life has its own weight, no one becomes your absolute center. And when no one is your absolute center, attraction becomes healthier, more stable, and paradoxically, stronger. Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. The one who does not fear losing cannot be dominated. In attraction, this inner freedom turns into magnetism, not because you manipulate, but because you are not for sale. Not because you control, but because you do not give yourself away without discernment. The strongest desire is born when two whole people choose each other, not when one dissolves into the other. The conclusion of this principle is clear and unembellished. Do not seek to be chosen by sacrificing yourself. Choose without losing yourself. Whoever achieves that needs no strategies, no games, no demonstrations. Their very posture already communicates the essential: I am here because I want to be, and I can leave without breaking. And that silent certainty is one of the highest forms of power that exist.